So, a few months ago, I made a video showing how to wrap a 3D pattern around a cylinder in Blender. But today, I'll be showing how to do the same thing in Plasticity. And I'm also going to show how you can link your Plasticity file into Blender using a free add-on, instead of exporting and importing. So to begin, I'll create a cylinder here at the origin. And I'll set the radius to 3 inches and the height to 18 inches. And with the cylinder selected, I'll hit the / key to zoom in. Next, I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll scale it in to 0.95 on X and Y, and 1.1 on Z. Then I'll select the original cylinder and hit Q, or come down here and select Boolean, and then I'll select the duplicate cylinder, make sure I'm set to difference, and then hit OK. And now I need to create the pattern objects. So I'll hit 7 on the number pad to switch to top view. Then I'll drag and drop my pattern image into the viewport, and I'll rotate it up 90 degrees. Then I'll hit the number 1 key on the number pad to switch to front view, and I'll move it up 9 inches so it's centered on the cylinder. And then I'll scale it up to right about there. And now I'll rotate it back 90 degrees and move it back down 9 inches so it's sitting on the grid. And then I'll hide the cylinder and hit 7 on the number pad to switch to top view. And I'm going to move the image over so that one of these pattern objects is sitting at the origin. And right about there should be good enough. And I'll start by drawing a circle here at the origin. And next I'll draw a line, and I'll snap it here at the origin to start, and then I'll click here for the second point, and then I can snap to the axis line and drag over to set the third point, and then right click to end the line. And now with the line selected, I'll come down here and click on these 3 dots and select mirror, and that will give me this little directional gizmo. And depending on which point I click on, that will determine the direction of the mirror. And I want it to mirror across the x-axis. So I'll click on this point here that's on the same side where my line is. And once I do that, it will mirror the line across. And now I can right click to accept it. So now I have this basic shape, but the lines are separate objects. So I'll select this line and then shift select the other line and hit J to join them together. Now I don't want these sharp corners, so I'll switch to point selection and select this point and shift select this point, then hit F and choose fillet. And now I can grab this handle and round these corners off. And I want to do the same thing here at the end and just round this off a little bit. So now I need to array this object around the origin. So I'll switch to edge selection, then come down here and click radial array. And then for the center point, I'll click here at the origin. And for degrees, I want 360, and for the number, I want 6. And that looks good, so I'll click OK to accept it. And now I have all these separate objects, but I want them to be all one object. So I'll hit F and type trim in the search box, and I'll select it. And now I can trim out all these lines that I don't need. Then I'll select everything and hit J to join them all together into one object. And now I'll switch to face selection. Click this face and extrude it up 0.25, and then I'll hide this curve object. Next I'll hit 7 to switch to top view, and I want to make some duplicates. So I'll switch to solid selection, and I'll select the object, hit Shift D, and drag it over 4.49. Then I'll do the same thing again here. And I'll do it one more time. And now I'll select all 4 objects, hit Shift D and move them up. but it looks like I also duplicated the pattern image, so let me back up and select only the 4 objects, and then I'll move them up 3.8 and then move them over 2.254. But if I zoom in, you see they don't line up very well, so I'll move them up a little bit more to 0.08, and that looks pretty good. So now I'll delete this duplicate image and select all these objects. Hit Shift D to duplicate and move them down to about there. And I'll zoom in, and I think I'll move them down a little more to about there. And that looks pretty good. So I'll unhide the cylinder and hide the pattern image. I'll select all these objects, hit G to activate the Move tool and move them over to the side. And now I'll select the outer face of the cylinder, hit F and type Unwrap, and select Unwrap Face, and that will project a flat representation of the outer face of the cylinder onto the grid. So I'll hit G and move it over here. Then I'll select all these parts and move them over. Wait a minute. Let me back up and switch to Object Selection and select all the objects, hit G, and move them over so they're on top of the surface. Then I'll hit 7 on the number pad to get into top view, and I'll center the objects vertically. And I'll move them over to about here. And don't worry that these are hanging off the end. That doesn't really matter, but now I want these objects to be on the cylinder. So with them all selected, I'll hit F and type Deform, and it's going to ask me to select the reference plane. So I'll select the plane. Then it wants me to select the target face. So I'll select the face of the cylinder. And it may take a few seconds to calculate, and there they are. But the wrap isn't perfect. As you can see, there's a little bit of a gap here. But you can fix that by adjusting the X and Y scale values here. And I found that a setting of 1.05 for X and Y seems to work pretty well. And it does take a few seconds for the program to calculate and adjust, but there you go. That looks pretty good. But I need the objects to be embedded into the cylinder instead of sitting on the face. And I can do that with this offset option. So I'll set the value to a negative 0.0005. And I'll give it a few seconds to calculate. But it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Let me try negative 0.005. And I'll give it a few seconds, and okay, that's better. I guess I had too many zeros in there. So I think that looks about right. So I'll go ahead and click OK to accept it. But before I do that, I want to enable this Keep Tools option so I can keep these pattern objects in case I want to use them again. And now I'll click OK to accept it. And the last thing I need to do is select the cylinder, hit Q to Boolean, and I'll select this pattern object and shift select all the rest. Then make sure I'm set to difference and click OK. And there it is. Now I could export the model and then import it into Blender. I did a whole tutorial on that topic if you want to check it out. There's a link in the description. But instead, I'm going to use the Blender bridge to link the model into Blender. And to do that, I need to install the add-on and configure some settings. So I'll come over to the Plasticity website. There's a link in the description. And you'll need to click here to download the zip file. which will save to your Downloads folder. So you'll need to move it to the folder where you keep your Blender add-ons. Now here in Blender, go to the Edit menu, Preferences, Add-ons, and Install from Disk. Then browse to your Add-ons folder and select the zip file and install. Now I already have it installed, so I'll hit Cancel, but once you install it, you'll see it here, so just save Preferences and close the window. And now if you open your sidebar, you'll see a new tab for Plasticity. But before you can use it, you need to come back over to Plasticity and open Preferences, then go to Server and make sure it's enabled. You only have to do this one time when you're installing the add-on. After that, it will be enabled by default and you won't have to do this again. So now I can go back to Blender and click Connect. And just to be clear, you do need to have your file open in Plasticity for this to work. You can't link to a saved file. It has to be currently open in Plasticity. So I'll go ahead and click Connect, and it may take a few seconds. But once it's connected, the menu will expand to show all the options. But the model isn't visible, so I'll need to click Refresh, and there it is. But it also brought in the plane and all the pattern objects, so I need to go back to Plasticity, and I'll select all these objects and then hit Ctrl-G to put them all in a group, and I'll call it Pattern. And then I'll hide the group and the sheet, so now only the cylinder is visible, and I'll hit Save since I haven't done that yet. Then I'll go back over to Blender, hit Refresh, and now only the cylinder is displayed. And now I can apply a matte cap, or I can switch over to the shading workspace and apply a material and set up lighting and render out an image or whatever I need to do. And if I want to make a change to the model, I can go back over to Plasticity, and maybe I want to add some holes here at the top for a mounting bracket or something. So I'll make a cylinder here at the origin with a radius of 0.15 and a height of 10 inches. I'll rotate it 90 degrees and move it up here and rotate it around until it looks about right. And then I'll hit Shift-D to duplicate it and rotate it 90 degrees. And then I'll run a Boolean to punch in the holes. Then I'll save, come back over to Blender and click Refresh, and the model will update to show the changes. And you also have this live link option, which would allow you to work in Plasticity and see the changes happening here in Blender automatically. So if you have two monitors with Plasticity on one screen and Blender on the other screen, you could take advantage of this option. I haven't used it though, so I don't know how well it works, but it is an option if you want to try it out. Something else you'll want to do before you render out an image is enable this Only Visible option, because even though I hid those extra parts in Plasticity and they're not visible here in the viewport, they're going to show up in your render. And you can see here in the outliner, the camera icon is still displayed. So if I set up a camera and render, you see those pieces still show up. So you can either select all these over here and turn off the camera, or you can enable this option, hit refresh, and now when I render, those pieces aren't visible anymore. And they're not showing up here in the outliner either. So now that you have the model linked, you can move it or hit Shift-D and duplicate it a few times and apply different materials to each of them or whatever you want. And over here in the menu, there are some other options you can adjust. If you don't want triangles, let me select this one, hit Tab and switch to Edit mode so you can see the topology. You can change this to n-gons if you want, and then click Refacet to update the model. But it's not updating for some reason. Oh, it's this one. You should probably do this before making duplicates. Anyway, now you can set the tolerance to something like 0.0001 and then refacet again to create more geometry and smooth it out. And you can also change the angle value to add more geometry to these inside faces. If I set this to 0.1 and hit refacet, you see I get more geometry in these curved areas. And there are some other options down here, but I don't really use these. Also, if you open up the advanced section, there are a few more options in here, but I don't really mess with these either. And once you're finished and you decide that you don't need the link back to Plasticity anymore, you can click the Disconnect button, and that will break the link. The models will remain here in Blender, but you won't be able to make any more changes in Plasticity and then refresh them here in Blender. So yeah, that's about it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and post them below. And if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.